succeed in employment, principles, practices, and innovations. My name is Caitlin Schnoor, and I am the National Initiatives Coordinator here at Heartland Alliance's National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity. And I just want to thank you again for joining us on today's webinar. Before we get started, I would like to introduce today's speakers. From the National Initiatives team, we have Chris Worland, our Associate Director for Field Building. I am also a speaker on today's webinar. We have Lily Alkins, the Chief Strategy Officer at Roca, Inc. And we also have Dana Emanuel, the Social Enterprise Operations Manager at Bright Endeavors. Before we get started, I'd just like to share a little bit about our team. So you can see that photo of our team. Again, we are the National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity based out of Heartland Alliance. And we're dedicated to ending chronic unemployment and poverty. We work at the intersection of practice, policy, and research. And we do field building work and policy and advocacy work to advance solutions to the systematic issues that drive chronic unemployment, as well as to guide effective and sustainable employment efforts and programming. We have 3 national initiatives: the National Transitional Jobs Network, the National Center on Employment and Homelessness, and our Black Men Overcoming Barriers and Realizing Employment, or Be More, initiative. And finally, just a few more housekeeping things before we get started. I would ask that you please use the questions and chat box to send a question to us. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so you're encouraged to submit questions throughout the webinar. And all panelists will be invited to answer questions towards the end of the webinar. We'll also make a video and slides available via our website. And finally, we would encourage that you tweet along with us using the hashtag OYE, or Opportunity Youth Employment Webinar. And again, you'll see that hashtag on the bottom of our slides. So with that, I'd like to pass off the presentation to Chris Worland.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. I'd like to just start by providing a little bit of our rationale for why we decided to create a toolkit and resources on Opportunity Youth Employment at this time, and also talk a little bit about the process that we used to develop our resources and our recommendations that we'll be sharing with you today. First of all, I'll just note that the material that we're sharing today is based on a new paper that we've produced called Providing True Opportunity to Opportunity Youth. It's a paper that's available for free on our website as part of our Youth Employment or Opportunity Youth Employment Toolkit. At the end of the webinar today, you'll also see our URL where you can access our website and access that free toolkit along with the paper. The National Initiatives team, along with the National Transitional Jobs Network, has really over the course of the last few years produced a number of resources focused on providing employment services to specific populations that face chronic unemployment and barriers to employment. And so the first reason for deciding that now was a good time to produce a paper on Opportunity Youth Employment was just that over the years we've focused on a number of populations that face barriers to employment, and it was certainly time for us to turn our attention to opportunity youth, because youth who are not in work or in school have been a focus of a number of employment programs that we've partnered with and been a focus of our technical assistance effort for many years. In addition to the fact that we just recognized that this was a gap in our resources that we needed to fill, now is also a particularly opportune time to be producing these resources and to be focused on employment services for opportunity youth. There's really an energy in the field right now among program providers, policymakers, philanthropic funders, researchers, and other stakeholders around connecting opportunity youth with employment. This is manifested at the federal policy level in some new requirements under the new workforce law, the Workforce Innovations and Opportunity Act, as well as a number of other federal policy initiatives that are emerging now, as well as just a general momentum and energy in the field around learning how to better provide these services and connect opportunity youth to employment. We are really just concerned that even in the midst of this energy and momentum around discussions and thought and publications around connecting opportunity youth to employment, that some of the most vulnerable opportunity youth, young people who face multiple and serious barriers to employment, who have experienced trauma, young people who've experienced homelessness, justice-involved youth, youth aging out of foster care, are in danger of being left behind by some of these efforts, even when they are deliberately targeted at opportunity youth. And so we really wanted to make sure that there were some resources and ideas and promising practices out there to address the specific employment needs of the most vulnerable opportunity youth and ensure that they're not left behind by those efforts. So the way that we determined what our recommendations would be for the field, we initially performed a literature review in which we looked at all of the evidence that we could find around youth employment practices more broadly, opportunity youth employment practices specifically, and then tried to drill down to see if there were any ideas or evidence in the literature around how to best serve opportunity youth who faced the most barriers to employment and who were least likely to succeed in the workforce. We were able to glean some findings from the literature, but we really determined that there was a significant gap in what we knew about best practices and promising practices for the young people that we were interested in serving. And so what we did was, we were also aware that there were a number of program providers that we partnered with in the field that were doing innovative work, that were testing and experimenting and innovating and developing promising practices for serving these young people. And we wanted to tap into what they were doing and share their promising practices. So what we did was develop an interview tool. We conducted outreach to a number of providers that we thought were doing exemplary work, and we interviewed those providers at length to determine what they thought was responsible for their success. And then we looked for the common threads among those interview responses and decided that if a number of different programs from diverse geographic areas serving different subpopulations all told us similar practices and ideas that were successful for them, that we could then recommend that those ideas be replicated in the field with a high degree of confidence that they were very likely to be effective. And so the best practices and promising practices, recommendations and principles that you see in the paper that we've created and that you'll hear about today are those that had emerged in multiple sites among multiple providers and that were deemed to be effective across a range of programs. And we definitely like to see further funding, further research and investigation, and further replication of these practices.
Great, thank you, Chris. So this is Caitlin again. And one thing that we also wanted to do in this paper was to really place employment at the center of the conversation around opportunity youth, and to illustrate the impact that youth employment as well as youth unemployment can have on young individuals themselves, their families, as well as society. So as you can see from this slide, we've connected employment or unemployment to a number of different outcomes, all of which are discussed in greater depth in our paper. And I won't touch on all 6 points here, but I do want to lift up a few things, including that youth employment is tied to future earnings. Youth employment has also been shown to lead to a decrease in justice involvement for especially vulnerable youth. And we're excited about a youth summer jobs program in Chicago that recent research shows was able to significantly reduce violent crime arrests among youth who live in low income and high violent neighborhoods here in Chicago. Finally, youth employment can also substantially increase family income. So it is important to remember that opportunity youth are often not just earning money for themselves, but are also earning money to help support their families. And we have seen research showing that youth involved in a transitional jobs program, again here in Chicago, were actually contributing the majority of their family's income during the program period. So all of this to say is that we really see connecting opportunity youth to employment opportunities as critical. At this point, I'd like to delve into the principles and practices and innovations that we identified, and again, that we write about at greater length in our new paper. So principle number 1, when it comes to employment programming for opportunity youth, is to target and reach youth who can benefit most. So the research shows that more intensive and expensive employment programs really work best for the people who need them most. And that folks who have a better chance of succeeding in the workforce aren't the best candidates for intensive employment programming, including programming that subsidizes wages or engages participants over a long period of time. So that is to say that if someone can succeed with less intensive programming, then many of the practices and principles that we're lifting up today might not necessarily be for them. And to make the best use of limited resources, employment programs serving opportunity youth need to recruit youth with the greatest barriers. Along with recruiting youth with high barriers to employment, is the idea that it will likely be necessary to reach out to youth because it's not realistic for programs to expect that these youth will show up on their own for programming. Assertive and persistent outreach is often necessary to bring opportunity youth into services, and this can take weeks or months. And our presenters, including Lily at Roca, will definitely share more about some of the strategies that they use to recruit the most vulnerable youth into programming. Finally, I'd also like to add that we found it was important to have strong referral relationships with the systems that serve opportunity youth, including the justice system as well as the foster care system. So number 2, design program engagement to align with the realities of serving youth. And this includes engaging with youth for as long as it takes. So while adult-oriented employment programs may engage with participants for about 3 to 9 months, we found that programs targeting opportunity youth with the greatest barriers to employment can have engagement periods that actually last for years. So by way of example, one of the programs that we spoke to, Larkin Street, based in San Francisco, California, told us that they aim to have an engagement period of 3 to 4 years because engaging with youth for even up to 1 year just wasn't enough time to help those youth move towards their employment goals. I believe that Lily and Dana will also talk about the importance of engaging with youth. Finally, I'd like to add that having this really extended as well as flexible engagement period facilitates many of the principles and practices that we highlight in our paper. So again, something that is really critical to the suggestions that we're making. Another aspect of designing program engagement to serve youth effectively is offering multiple chances to fail and try again. So we know that the skills needed to be successful in work can take time to master, and we can't expect youth with high barriers to employment to get those skills right the first, second, or even third time. And programs need to recognize that young people are going to mess up and plan ahead for it. And many of the programs that we spoke to will provide opportunities for youth to get fired from a transitional job or be asked to leave programming for another reason, but then really have an open door policy where that youth is encouraged to address the obstacles and barriers that led to the quote-unquote firing, and then really be brought back into services. And finally, for me, number 3 is to address the unique developmental needs of opportunity youth. So when we were discussing effective service delivery for young job seekers with barriers to employment, many providers stress the importance of meeting youth where they are. And what providers meant when they were using this term was that it's important to recognize and accept where a young person is in terms of their readiness and willingness to take steps to move towards employment goals. One way that programs might implement the idea of meeting youth where they are is by offering different types of employment programming. So for example, again, to call out Larkin Street, based in San Francisco, they offer what we might call a staged work experience. So for youth that are ready to do entry-level work, that has a low level of commitment, but that provides an opportunity to earn wages in a safe and stable environment, they have a transitional jobs program where youth can essentially drop in and earn an hourly wage doing work such as cleaning offices. For youth that are further along in their process, there's also a job readiness class that then leads to time-limited paid job opportunities with organizations and employers in the community, as well as vocational training and supported services so that youth can move beyond entry-level work and into higher wage-paying jobs. And finally, applying therapeutic concepts to employment services. So many providers in the field have taken therapeutic tools and have figured out ways to apply them to employment effectively. And that is not using therapeutic tools as a way to treat a pathology, but instead to really help youth who have barriers to employment be able to be more successful and move along in their process of connecting to jobs. And we really found that this is working in the field. Again, all of these concepts are discussed in greater detail in our paper, but just to call out a few, those include recognizing the stages of change, motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, as well as cognitive behavioral interventions. And with that, I would like to pass it back over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Caitlin. The fourth recommendation that we make is to offer paid employment opportunities to opportunity youth. We arrived at this determination for a few reasons. One is just that many of the programs that we engaged with, as well as many other successful models for serving opportunity youth, do use some kind of paid employment opportunity or otherwise compensating young people for their participation in the program. And we think that this is effective for a number of reasons. One is that, as we mentioned earlier in discussing the findings of our literature review, that earned income really has a stabilizing effect on young people and their families. And we understand that among low-income youth and their families, the income that the young people are earning through these programs is really essential for helping those families meet their needs, and and they're really contributing substantially to the overall income of their families, and that's a critical thing for low-income families. Also, there's an experiential learning component to this, where if an individual is working and earning money, they're experientially learning how to be a better worker, and learning the expectations and successful behaviors of the workforce by working and earning income. And by providing compensation for those activities, you're really making sure that that work experience is as close as possible to what young people will experience when they enter the competitive labor market. And we really think that that has a great deal to do with successfully building skills and developing the work readiness of the participants. Also, we've found that the promise of earned income is a really powerful incentive for youth to engage in the program in the first place. The young people that we're talking about, opportunity youth that are very disadvantaged and that face a lot of barriers, are unlikely in many cases to seek out services on their own, but if there's paid employment connected with that, that's a strong incentive for them to engage in programming and also to receive other services that they might need. Finally, there's an employer engagement component to wage subsidies in particular, where having a wage subsidy connected with a young job seeker can be an incentive to an employer to take a chance to take that young worker on their work site. We found that through employer survey research of a number of subsidized employment programs, that employers participating in these programs said that that their perception of young job seekers with barriers to employment actually changed as a result of participating in the program and taking these young people in addition to a number of other benefits that employers experienced along with participating in these programs. Number 5 is the importance of building trusting relationships. We think that this might even be the most critical factor in delivering effective services to opportunity youth, is developing a positive and trusting relationship with an adult. I know that I've found this to be the case anecdotally with many programs that I've worked with, and over the course of many years of interviewing participants in employment programs, if you ask an individual what the most critical factor in their success is, never do they say that it was a result of the program following evidence-based practices and a high level of model fidelity. Instead, they virtually always name a staff member. They identify a person on the staff of that program who believed in them, who didn't give up on them, and who saw them through to completion, and in whom they have a high degree of trust. And so we really believe that having a trusting relationship is absolutely critical. We also recognize that with opportunity youth who have experienced the trauma of homelessness, of justice system involvement, and of extreme poverty, that building that trust really takes a long time. And this is another indication of why having extended and flexible periods of engagement for young people is especially important, because it takes a long time to build those trusting relationships. The programs that we talked with used a few different techniques for developing those trusting relationships. In many cases, they identified that that was the #1 job requirement and job duty of their frontline staff, was to build relationships, and that all of the other positive impacts came second. In addition to that, in many cases, programs told us that they would identify a single staff member who would be responsible for developing the primary relationship with the young person, and that relationship would remain throughout the entire period of program engagement for that participant. And it's also something to consider when you're talking about identifying new staff members and the characteristics of frontline staff that you want to hire, is that ability to be empathetic and to develop trusting relationships with young participants. And then finally, it's critical to know how you want to educate employers. I think that we all agree that it's important to take a strengths-based approach when talking about opportunity youth to employer partners, to let them know all of the benefits that they stand to experience if they partner with your program and provide employment opportunities to the young people with whom you're working. And so, all of our recommendations stem from a strengths-based approach. However, we heard from our partners that we interviewed that it was also really critical to provide education to employers on how to facilitate the success of young people, that they might need to have some tools in their toolbox, some techniques and some approaches that might differ from how they typically treat their employees, that will allow them to make sure that the young people that they're working with experience success in the workplace. And that might involve talking to them about ways to frame disciplinary conversations as constructive criticism, and to help young people understand what they need to do differently and how they can improve their performance. It's really important to coach employers on providing really consistent and regular and frequent feedback on how those young people are doing in the workplace. And then also some of our providers talked about educating employers on how to avoid re-traumatizing triggers in the workplace for youth who've experienced trauma, and to practice kind of a sense of trauma-informed care in the workplace to avoid re-traumatizing young people, and to help employers recognize when behaviors that young employees are exhibiting are really, reactions to trauma rather than maybe something like, an attitude problem. And to give them the tools that they need in order to respond adequately and appropriately to those responses. And then finally, employers need to know that you as a program provider are a resource available to them to intervene, that they're not in this on their own, and that if an issue arises in the workplace, that they can call upon the program to intervene and to provide some support for that person. I also just finally want to note something that I overlooked when I was talking about paid employment opportunities, is that we found that social enterprise employment, that is having a revenue generating business within an employment program, has been seemingly a particularly effective way to engage young people in paid work experience. It allows programs to have a lot of control over the work environment, to provide some of these developmental aspects of employment to young people, and to provide this kind of staged or graduated responsibility and stress for young people so that they can be eased into the expectations and stresses of the workplace in a controlled environment, and a safe place for them to make mistakes while providing a real work for real pay experience. All right, thanks very much. That concludes our portion of discussing our recommendations in the paper, and now we're going to get to the good part, which is hearing from some of our providers.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So next up on the webinar is Lily Elkins, Chief Strategy Officer at Roca. I'm just going to quickly share Lily's bio. Lily has served as Roca's Chief Development and Strategy Officer since 2011. Ms. Elkins provides assistance with resource development, strategic planning and financial forecasting, program design, development, operations and replication, program evaluation, including work with third-party evaluators, and operations of special projects. Ms. Elkins has over 20 years of fundraising, program design, and program management experience working with nonprofits. Lily, you are up. Please just let me know as you would like me to advance your slides.
Sure. Hi. Always very odd to hear your own bio. That said, I work for Roca. Roca runs an intervention model for very high-risk young people currently in 3 sites in Massachusetts. We are working with 500 very high-risk young men and 200 high-risk young mothers across the Commonwealth, and 500 young men intensively, another 200 less intensively, and 200 high-risk young mothers. And I'm going to focus on the work we do with young men and around our transitional employment, but in order to give you an idea of what we do, I'm going to talk a little bit about our whole model, and you can flip slides. If you can move ahead one, thanks. So Roca's mission is to disrupt the cycle of incarceration and poverty by helping young people transform their lives. That is a very fancy way of saying we run a cognitive behavioral therapy model in the community for all young people who are voluntarily engaged. The trick with that is we run a program model for young people who are, if you are familiar with the stages of change, in pre-contemplation or contemplation, meaning they don't believe they need to change their behaviors. We think they need to change their behaviors. They are, if you can flip slides for a second. For our young men, we serve 17 to 24-year-old young men, all of whom are criminal justice system involved, all of whom are assessed at high risk for long-term adult incarceration, most of whom have felony charges in their background, and all of whom have no work history. Most are high school dropouts. Few have GEDs, but very few. We get our referrals either through the Commonwealth as part of a random control trial evaluation pay for success project, or through our community partners and through direct street outreach. And Chris and Katie said something earlier about focusing on young people who are most at risk. We believe that this, because of who we serve and because they are high-risk criminal justice folks, we don't mix risk levels. So in fact, if we think you're too low risk for us, we will refer you to another program. So if you can show up every day on your own for programming when we start to work with you, you are generally not high enough risk for us, and we will refer you to someone else. We are looking for the guys that we need to go chase down. We have to convince to come to programming. We have to convince that they want to change their behaviors, because their inclination is that's not necessary. The reason we don't mix risk levels is a criminal justice principle around risk that says if you mix low risk and high risk offenders, you do not create more low risk offenders, but in fact, low risk offenders become high risk offenders. And so you will increase the risk of those that are low risk and not do anything beneficial to those that are high risk. So we, in an effort to not do harm and not do damage, only work with high risk offenders. Okay, thanks. You could flip. You can actually go one more. That's just some statistics which are helpful, but probably not necessary right now. Roca's model is a 4-year long-term intervention model. It is 2 years of intensive services with 2 years of follow-up. Transitional employment is one component of that model. And I'm going to contradict Chris a little bit, at least from Roca's perspective. There is a period when we will no longer work with young people. And so what we found in looking at data is that after working with someone for more than 2 years intensively, they actually start to regress in their abilities to, in their behaviors. And so we work with young people for 2 years intensively and then for 2 years less intensively. And that's based on our own internal data and our target population. That said, that may be different for other organizations. Roca has 2 long-term outcomes, both measured at 5 years from enrollment. One is no reincarcerations, either for a probation violation or for a no charge, and the other is retained employment. We track data throughout a person's engagement, and we track every interaction we have, and we do have intermediate outcomes which revolve around educational gains, employment placement, having no new arrests, and having no new technical violations. One of our major contracts at the moment is a pay for success contract, and we are actually being paid based on demonstrating no new arrests and retained employment. Roca believes that you can't succeed as a high-risk young offender if you don't have a job. If there's not a way to earn an income and generate revenue so that you can do something legitimately, you will likely end up back in jail. And so we use transitional employment as one tool to do that. We also use more traditional job placement once people are a little more prepared along the stages of change. If you can advance the slides. As I said, it's a 2-year intensive model with 2 years of follow-up. Roca bases its entire model on the stages of change. So in every piece of the model, we build relapse in. We expect our young people to fail, and we expect them to learn from that failure, and we work with them to learn from that failure. And I'll talk a little bit more about the stages of change in a few minutes. But our job is to use cognitive behavioral restructuring techniques administered by paraprofessionals to teach people to think differently, to act differently. So we want you to understand why whatever criminal behaviors you've been engaging in are not the best option for you, and to try to change those behaviors. What we've found over time is that it takes 18 months for a young person to see sustained behavior change. And so initially our young people get arrested, things happen, but it is our job to reduce relapses over and over across time and to make them shorter so that ultimately young people can sustain behavior changes, most often around criminal behavior, employment engagement, reduction in substance abuse, and there are probably some other behaviors. Rarely is our target an increase in education, and that just has to do a lot with where our young people are in the stages of change and where they are in their readiness. Most of our young people want to advance their employment after they start working again. The intervention model has 4 components. The first we technically call relentless outreach and follow-up. We less technically call it legalized stalking. We relentlessly do street outreach with people over and over and over again until they are ready to show up on their own. Generally speaking, it takes 4 to 6 months to engage someone in a relationship where they'll be ready to show up for programming on a regular basis. And if you have ever been to a Roca event, when young people talk at events, almost every success story starts their story the same way. I showed up at Roca because they wouldn't go away. They just wouldn't leave me alone, and it was easier to start working with them. For young people who aren't ready to change or don't think they need to change, that level of outreach is pretty critical. That 4 to 6 weeks of outreach is followed by something we call transformational relationships. It is an intensive case management model that involves 2 to 3 intentional face-to-face contacts a week about behavior change. So it is a youth worker who has a 1 to 25 caseload, talking to you at least twice a week, really 2 to 3 times a week, about things you need to change in your behavior, about work, about reducing gang activity, about reducing other street activity, about reducing domestic violence, reducing substance abuse. Those relationships are really, and Chris said this earlier, are really key to young people's success. It is, our young people often come from families where there's not a stable adult in the household. If they're living with their parents at all anymore, they need some kind of stable adult or stable figure in their life where they can try to develop a relationship and get some support. And that part of the job of the transformational relationship is to do that. The third component of the model, which is what I'll spend the rest of my time talking about, is stage-based programming. The stage-based programming is our language around working towards economic independence. So it's life skills, educational programming, pre-vocational programming, and employment programming, which for us includes transitional employment. We believe almost all of our young people need transitional employment. And we have a couple of levels, which I'll talk about. And then otherwise, everything is sort of stage-based. You can go through transitional employment at Roca multiple times and fail multiple times. and go through a rehire process to come back into the program. Part of the reason for that is that we believe people learn from their mistakes, and that, quite honestly, because our young people want to work, it is a bit of a hook to work on other behavior change. So if you got fired from transitional employment because you showed up late 3 days in a row because you were high the night before 3 days in a row and couldn't wake up for work, one of the things we might do is try to get you into a substance abuse group as part of your rehire process to come back into transitional employment. So we use the transitional employment not only to allow people to earn a wage, but also to help promote their behavior change process. The last piece of the model is something we call engaged institutions, and for us, engaged institutions, my boss likes to refer to it as we marry the cops and probation and parole and every other public institution that works with our young people. Our young men are mostly not in school anymore. Really, none of them are in school anymore, but they are all attached to the criminal justice system. Many are attached to some kind of mental health or healthcare providers. They are attached to a lot of other public systems, and it's our job to not only create behavior change with our young people, but to also support behavior change with those institutions so that our young people can engage better with those two institutions and are more likely to succeed. Can you all advance the slide? Thanks. For those who aren't familiar with it, everything we do is based on the stages of change. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, action, and sustaining. Because we at Roca are a little challenged sometimes. We like to put nice, simple words attached to things. So, no, I'm not ready to change. Maybe I might change. Okay, I think I'll make a plan, to I'm actually doing something, to I'm sustaining it. For years, Roca didn't base its programming on this model, and we, did a lot around self-esteem and building people's character, and it turns out we helped create a lot of drug dealers with really good self-esteem. And so we tried to go back to what really works and away from that, and looked at all of our data and realized what really matters with these young people is if they're going to change their behaviors and put down their guns and stop dealing drugs and actually try to do something different with their lives. And so that's our goal for all of the young people we work with. Again, everybody starts at pre-contemplation or contemplation for us, and if they're really in a planning or action stage, we are likely to refer them to another program. We expect relapse in every component of the program. In fact, to get from stage 1 to phase 1 to phase 2 of a transformational relationship, you have to relapse, and a youth worker has to be able to get you back engaged into the program. If the youth worker can't do that, we don't believe they've built enough of a relationship with you to be able to get you to work on your behavior change over time. If you could advance the slide, that'd be great. So this is just a picture of our intervention model, and if you'll see, right about in the middle of the picture is a little line that's a starting line, and that's sort of where most programs start. Most programs start with people who are ready to show up. So if you go to a traditional employment program, you have to follow their rules, you have to be able to show up, and you have to be able to engage the way the program wants you to engage. All of our services are designed, quite honestly, just to get you over that starting line. We're less concerned about career ladders, we're less concerned about career pathways. I am more concerned about getting you a job that you can actually retain for a period of time. The next step beyond us is a career ladder and a career pathway and all of those other things, but the reality is we need to get you there. And so all of our stage-based programming starts with drop-in activities. So you can come once, you can come twice, including GED classes, including life skills, and all of it builds up all the way through to more formal, getting your GED, getting an industry-recognized certification, and we work you through the change process along the way, and we expect, again, that people will relapse as they move through that process. If you could change the slide. Roca offers 2 levels of transitional employment. We started out with just basic transitional employment, which for us is work crews of 5 to 7 young men and a supervisor, line of sight supervision. Our goal is for you to get 60 consecutive days of work. For our young men, it takes 12 to 15 months of transitional employment to achieve 60 consecutive days of work. Again, we do have some limits. What we found was that if you didn't hit that goal within 18 months, you are likely not going to hit that goal. And so you can only be in basic transitional employment for 18 months. You can be fired and rehired as many times as necessary in that 18-month window, but at 18 months, we're going to try to place you in an unsubsidized job. For those who complete the 60 consecutive days, we also offer more advanced transitional employment crews. They are more advanced and targeted, so they may be painting crews or apartment turnover crews. And they're smaller individual crews. Sometimes they're individual placements, and they are a little more highly skilled. Young people are in those crews for a maximum of 3 months, and it's our idea to try to help them build a little more skills, to have a little more time to work through their behavior change if they've got some key issues, as long as they've been demonstrating some progress along the way. Young people in basic crews are paid minimum wage, only for the hours they work. They are required to come to a day of what we call professional development, but they're not paid for that day. Advanced crews also are required to come for professional development. They do get paid $1 more an hour than the basic crews. Crews are contracted with city and state departments, local municipalities, housing authorities, and Roca maintains contracts for property maintenance, landscaping, snow removal, graffiti removal, those kind of jobs that don't require high skills but teach people how to show up, engage in work, listen to a supervisor, complete a task, the things that our young people quite honestly really need in order to maintain entry-level employment somewhere else. Once they get through transitional employment, our young people also get offered sometimes on-the-job training if it's appropriate with an employer, and we have intensive job placement services as well. If you can go one more slide ahead. To do all of this, we have something called a retained revenue account with the Commonwealth. It's a little bit of a misnomer. The retained revenue account is a budget line in the Commonwealth's budget that has no money attached to it. What it allows for is for state and city governments to contract with us absent bid. So while there's no money tied to it, a housing authority can contract with us and not bid out the job, and then it's still a legal way for them to issue a contract. If we didn't have that retained revenue account, we'd have to competitively bid for every job we have, and that, because we're a training program and because sometimes what we do costs a little more than other services, can often be a problem for us. If you could go one more slide. So again, our model is 2 years of intensive services. We have a 4 to 6 month engagement period. That engagement period is really just developing relationships. There are some drop-in activities. My favorite drop-in activity of late is teaching people how to patch a hole in a wall. But it's, you know, a one-time thing where you can engage someone and sort of show them there are some other things that they've not experienced before. The next 18 months is all around behavior change. That it's in that window that young people are really engaged in transitional employment. And then the last 2 years of the model are sustaining employment, sustaining behavior change, and follow-up period. Can you advance one more time? So last year we served 494 men intensively in programming. Of them, 80% were retained throughout the entire year and remained active. For our young people who are not interested in being engaged in programming, that's a relatively high number. 82% of our participants were engaged in stage-based programming. During the year, 248 of those were engaged in transitional employment. When you look at our long-term outcomes, 92% of our young men had no new arrests, 95% had no technical violations, and of those placed in employment, 85% of them retained their employment for a period of 6 months. While we know during the first 2 years young people will relapse, they will get arrested, they will lose their jobs. They will require a replacement. We believe that working with them over time, over that 2-year window, we can get them to a point where they successfully sustained behavior changes where we can hit these outcomes. And these phase 3 outcomes have been pretty consistent for the last 5 or 6 years at Roca. You want to go, I have one last slide. So the other thing that we think is interesting is we're part of a pay for success contract with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and through that contract we're serving 929 young men. And in developing that contract, the Commonwealth went and looked at the rates of incarceration for our young people, and then at the rates of employment for our young people. And for a comparable sample, our young people were having gone through the intervention model or being engaged in the intervention model, are placed at twice as high of a rate as those, employed at twice as high of a rate as those that haven't received Roca services. And we are reducing incarceration for that same group of young people by 65%. And we think, you know, honestly, those two things are intrinsically linked. If our young people weren't working and weren't working on this behavior change, we believe a lot more of them would be incarcerated over time. That's it. So if there's questions at the end, I will be around.
Great, thank you so much, Lily. And again, we will be having a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So just to move along, next up is Bright Endeavors. Our speaker is Dana Emanuel, and she's the Social Enterprise Operations Manager at Bright Endeavors. Just to quickly share her bio, Dana has worked at the intersection of business and social mission for a decade. Dana earned her degree in international relations from Northwestern and has traveled internationally to research and work alongside fair trade artisans. Dana previously served in marketing roles for social impact businesses, including Whole Foods Market, as well as in international microfinance. Dana joined Bright Endeavors' team 5 years ago and currently serves as Social Enterprise Operations Manager. Dana, you are up. Just let me know as you would like me to advance your slides.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, the National Initiatives team at the Heartland Alliance. We're really excited to be part of this, and congrats on the report. It's a really great one that we've shared amongst our staff as well as our network here in Chicago. I'm excited to be here today and share with you all Bright Endeavors' model of transitional jobs for opportunity use. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Bright Endeavors is a nonprofit social enterprise of a larger organization called New Moms. We provide a pathway out of poverty for adolescent mothers, 16 to 24 years old, who receive coaching, guidance, and hands-on job training at our social enterprise, learning how to make soy candles and bath products. To give you a sense of scale, Bright Endeavors has about $150,000 per year in candle sales, and that funds about 75% of our programming. We serve, our goal is to serve about 70 participants per year at Bright Endeavors, and the participants that we enroll at Bright Endeavors, you know, we plan for attrition, so we end up serving at least 53 participants per year. You could advance the next slide. So as I mentioned, Bright Endeavors is part of a larger nonprofit called New Moms. New Moms is a comprehensive social service agency that was founded in 1983 and is currently in the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood, which is one of the most economically depressed as well as violent neighborhoods in the city. And Bright Endeavors is a manufacturer about 3 miles east of New Moms in a similar neighborhood. New Moms itself serves 2 generations, both adolescent mothers, 13 to 24, as well as their children. And in the last fiscal year, New Moms served over 280 mothers and over 300 children. So we're serving over 500 participants per year. As you can see from these statistics, many face pretty significant barriers to employment, including high rates of poverty and homelessness, About 70% of our participants who enter into our program have experienced violence and domestic or sexual abuse in the home. Many have dropped out of school and have low literacy levels, and all of whom are pregnant and or parenting. You can go ahead to the next slide. So Bright Endeavors, as part of New Moms, participates in New Moms' centralized outreach and intake services. We have a recruitment and intake specialist who focuses on targeting outreach and recruitment for participants on the west and south sides of the city of Chicago in particular. So our intake specialists focus on working with the Department of Corrections and Department of Juvenile Justice, parole officers, health clinics and hospitals where participants go for services for themselves as they're parenting and for their children. She goes to and talks with governmental benefits agencies, domestic violence shelters, local churches and networks. And so a lot of work is done to access really grassroots networks of referrals. We have a refer open house here at Bright Endeavors to welcome people here so that our refer partners can also get an understanding of what we are doing here at Bright Endeavors as well as at New Moms. Of course, the best referral sources for is from word of mouth from our past participants. I've been here about 5 years, and I would estimate 70 to 75% of our participants actually heard about it through their sister or their best friend or their neighbor. And our goal is with outreach and intake that we screen in and not out. So participants can come to us with any varying levels of literacy, of homelessness, of stable housing. Really the eligibility requirements are around age. And for Bright Endeavors, since we're a workforce development program and a manufacturing facility, we also do a drug screen for participants in workforce development. You have to be drug-free to be here at Bright Endeavors. Because New Moms is a larger nonprofit, they're resourced enough to offer 3 different programs, and participants who go through the intake program or the intake process at New Moms can access one of our 3 programs or at any given time any of them. Housing at New Moms' new facility. You can see on this little photo, New Moms built a brand new LEED certified building. We moved in 2 years ago, and that serves as the residence for 40 women and their children, which represents over 80% of the dedicated bed space in the city of Chicago for adolescent mothers and their children. The need is great. New Moms also offers home visiting services, parent support groups, and doula services for moms-to-be. And of course, a 3rd program that New Moms offers is workforce development. The workforce development program includes a paid training at Bright Endeavors. You can go ahead. So I'm going to focus on the structure of our workforce development program and dive a little deeper into Bright Endeavors, and then towards the end talk about some of the challenges that we face, as we're kind of an adolescent program ourselves, and so some of our growth areas and the results that we have here at Bright Endeavors. The workforce development program at New Moms is a 13-week program, which we kind of established in 2010 when New Moms and Bright Endeavors merged together. Bright Endeavors was founded as an independent job training program, an independent 501c3 nonprofit that merged with New Moms in 2010 to access the wraparound services that New Moms can offer, and so New Moms could have an earned income revenue stream as well. So since 2010, we've had this program, which is, oh, you can go ahead.
Sorry about that. I'm getting back to your slide.
No problem. Okay, so the workforce development program is at its current stage a 13-week program. It's been different iterations over the past few years. We had it all the way up to 6-month program and found that that was actually a little bit too long, that participants maybe lost some motivation to find their own job outside of Bright Endeavors' walls. And so we scaled back, and it's now 13 weeks. 3 phases. The first phase is a classroom training phase of 5 weeks. The second phase is a Bright Endeavors hands-on paid training for 8 weeks. And then the 3rd phase is an indefinite period of Job Club. Participants can continue to access that all the way up until their 25th birthday. So phase 1 is classroom training. Participants are screened in, as I mentioned, so the only requirement is age and drug-free status. As of day one, participants are assigned an individual employment coach, and that employment coach sticks with them for the entirety of their time at New Moms, as well as during retention up to 2 years after they leave our walls. The employment coach works with participants on employment barriers outside of just workforce, including daycare, including healthcare, including housing. Phase one also includes transportation incentives because it's unpaid. Participants do need ways to get here for training, and professional clothing incentives. We work with corporate partners like PricewaterhouseCoopers, for example, to fill a professional clothing closet. And in the 5 weeks, participants are working on assessments and goal-setting activities. They are learning about career possibilities. They're getting exposure to careers through weekly career outings. They're building their resumes. They're doing mock interviews. They're engaging with speakers who come to New Moms for those for classroom time. And they also have a financial literacy curriculum. This is to prepare our participants for their paid training at Bright Endeavors when they get a paycheck. So we bring in a representative from a local bank that offers free checking for participants with any level of credit history, as well as sign them up for direct deposit so that they don't fall victim to predatory money exchange practices in the neighborhood especially. Participants all the while are training in soft skills, including conflict resolution, communication, teamwork, initiative, and professionalism. These are our main tenets that we repeat over and over again at Bright Endeavors as well. So participants are using these skills in Bright Endeavors paid training. So you can go to the next slide. When a participant graduates from Bright Endeavors, and we plan for a lot of attrition, right? So we enroll 70 participants. Our goal is to enroll 70 participants in day one of workforce phase one in the classroom, and we plan attrition. We know that 53 or less participants will actually come to Bright Endeavors. Participants who don't make it through the classroom training phase are always encouraged to reapply after 30 days and go back through. Some of our most successful participants have actually come through the program in its entirety 2 times. So at Bright Endeavors, we offer an 8-week paid training. Participants learn how to make and sell soy candles. It's not just candles that we could be doing. We could be making widgets, but really the goal is to build their transferable skills, to build their employment experience on their resume, to build community, to build up their self-esteem. And we do that not just by selling and making soy candles, but participants learn customer service skills. They learn from our business development manager small business training. Participants are welcoming guests at Bright Endeavors all the time and explaining what they do. All the while they're getting individualized feedback from their employment coach and Bright Endeavors staff. I should mention here, just as Lily mentioned, Roca, all of our staff at Bright Endeavors and New Moms is trained in stages of change, motivational interviewing, and strengths-based approach. So even non-direct service staff, even our accountants at New Moms, can engage a participant in a discussion in the hallway if she notices something is going on. She has the tools by which to engage in conversation and then redirect a participant back to her case manager if need be. At Bright Endeavors, participants also are getting exposure to different career opportunities. We go on career outings, for example, to some of the customers that purchase our candles, like Whole Foods Market in the city. We visit Whole Foods and they take us on a tour, teach us about customer service training, gain exposure, build an employer network and an employer pipeline for our participants, really engage Whole Foods and other companies like that, like Starbucks as well. Participants have midpoint and final one-on-one evaluations in addition to the less formal coaching that happens on a daily, sometimes hourly, time. And participants are, really encouraged to think about the commitments that they've made to the program and if they're fulfilling those commitments both to the program, our policies, as well as themselves. In phase 2, as well as phase 1, if a participant breaks her commitments to our policies and programs, there are conversations that we have and logs that we follow. And we hold participants accountable. We really set the bar high because we believe that participants have the skills and the motivation to continue to uphold the program policies. But we also expect that a participant won't always be able to do that at any given time. So if a participant has excess broken commitments and needs to withdraw from the program, again, we always encourage her to reapply, and she is welcome to come back to Bright Endeavors after reapplying and complete her time here. You can move to phase 3, or to the next slide, please. Participants who don't have employment at the time of graduation from Bright Endeavors are encouraged to take advantage of our job club. This is an indefinite period of time, as long as it takes for a participant to find permanent employment. Participants have 3 times a week meetings here at our job lab at Bright Endeavors, where they're continuing to work one-on-one with their employment coach. They gain access to our job leads and career outings. You can see these photos from, one of them from our visit to Whole Foods, another one is in a business downtown Chicago. And participants are incentivized with transportation cards, shopping and professional clothing closets, as well as the ongoing mentoring and stability that coming to a familiar and safe space provides. You can go ahead. Thank you. So our program is designed with opportunity use in mind. I've mentioned a bunch of these, so I don't need to reiterate them, but we do use theories like stages of change and trauma-informed care to support our participants in their transition to permanent employment. The program commitments also allow participants to pause our program. We're working with pregnant and parenting mothers, and so many times that means they need to take maternity leave to have their baby. And part of the coaching that we can offer is when a participant is preparing to become a mother, then after 2 weeks, once the baby is born, after 2 weeks, she calls and says, I'm ready to come back, and our participant's employment coach can work with her on bonding with the baby, finding newborn child care, and making sure she's really ready to come back into the workforce. We offer tangible incentives at every stage of our workforce program. Career exposure is critical. It's absolutely essential that participants, they can both dream big and be realistic with their goals. And part of that is knowing what is possible. Most of our participants come into the program wanting to be a nurse or a daycare provider or a social worker because that's all they've really engaged with in the professional sphere. So one of our jobs, we think, is to really expose them to possibilities, bring them to manufacturing centers, bring them downtown, and take them to a beautiful office on the 68th floor of a building. Work with them to introduce them to the city colleges of Chicago for GED classes or associate's degrees as well. It's also critical for us to define our rituals and celebrate success at Bright Endeavors. We're working with teenagers, and a lot of times they like to be publicly celebrated, publicly known for their achievements. So we celebrate small and big achievements. On a daily ritual we call daily appreciations. At the end of every shift, we get together and appreciate something about the work that we did that day. And we also offer ongoing retention services for program graduates. This is 6 months after a participant gains a job, and then up to 2 years. So you can go ahead. There's areas that we can grow for sure. Bright Endeavors has historically not developed a very strong and wide partnerships with employers, and that's changing this year. We've really focused our attention on building a job developer role to staff who will be really tasked with building employer pipelines. We, for example, are looking into the local manufacturing community here in Chicago. There's lots of job openings and some interest from participants, so we've brought in manufacturing representatives who can talk with our participants about what those jobs are like and notify us when jobs at their level become available. The other piece of it is growing our corporate partners. This benefits not just our participants for employment, but also Bright Endeavors, social enterprise, and small business. You can see here the candles on the right that we created. Those were commissioned 5 Ben & Jerry's, and they sold them last summer in their scoop shops. They smelled and looked like little ice creams. And we've done private label candles for hotels before. We've done private label candles for large businesses. And this can be an in point for our participants, a way for our program to talk with a big company about offering employment opportunities. And we're really focusing on building out those corporate partnerships, not just from selling candles and employer pipelines, but also welcoming employers to Bright Endeavors. You can see on the left there's a photo of a visiting group from a corporation downtown in Chicago that came and got to know our participants, offered their services to participants so that participants could ask them what it's like to be a working mom in a big business, etc. Corporate partners can also become institutional funders, which is always in the back of our mind as well. You can go ahead, one more slide. So the results of Bright Endeavors are specific to our job training program in that this year to date, July 1st through June 8th, we've placed 44 participants in jobs, and this is a little under our goal for the year. So next year we'll do better. From fiscal year 14, we have a retention rate of 76%. For 1 year of employment or more, and the participants' average income from entry to exit increases 3.5 times, and we estimated their annualized tax contributions from participant wages of over $12,000. So we really do believe in lift up the work that National Initiatives has done to show that that it's good for society when Opportunity Youth finds jobs. So you can go to the last slide. I encourage you to check out Bright Endeavors' website for more information and to take a look at our candles. We sell them online as well. And I would be happy to talk with you more about our social enterprise model and balancing the business and the program. Please feel free to follow us in our social media as well. We love to share best practices. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Dina. At this point, I know that we are running low on time, but I am going to go ahead and pass over the webinar to Carl Wiley, one of our colleagues here at National Initiatives, who's going to facilitate an abbreviated question and answer session.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. This is Carl Wiley from the National Initiatives team. So we've got some really good questions sent in so far. But before we jump into those really quickly, I want to just make a note. Some people have asked. We are going to try and make slides and a recording of this webinar available in the next few days after this presentation. And also, if we don't get to your questions, please keep sending them in. We are compiling them. We'll try and answer those and send that information out with those slides the next couple of days. So with that, we'll jump into the first question. This is from Aaron McGuire. And I think this goes out to everyone on the presentation today. Any ideas on how to hold boards accountable to that new 75% expectation? In my experience sitting in on meetings with local boards, folks are scrambling to try and figure out how to make their current work match with the new requirement. Rather than looking for ways to more effectively reach out of school youth. That's impossible, even when agencies such as my own, which work exclusively with out-of-school youth, are sitting at the table. And I've been finding the resources too many barriers to entry for out-of-school youth. Do we have any ideas? So we'll turn this over to Chris and our team to maybe lead off the answer for that.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, we are very encouraged by all of the changes in the new law that are intended to improve access to mainstream services through the public workforce system to individuals with barriers to employment, including the new provisions requiring that boards serve 75% out-of-school youth with their youth employment services. Having said that, as happy as we are about the changes in the law, we recognize that that enforcing some of those provisions or making sure that they're implemented at the state and local level will remain a challenge. And so in many cases, there's not necessarily what we would call teeth to some of the requirements in the law. However, I think it's great that that you at the local level are at the table and acting as an advocate. I think that there's not a really easy answer to that question, but I think a big part of it is going to be local advocates, people who are concerned at the local level, who are actively advocating on behalf of the opportunity youth that they want to see better served by those systems. And beyond that, you know, we are working very diligently on our feedback to the Department of Labor around their forthcoming guidance to that law. And so, you know, we'll definitely, you know, take your question into consideration as we craft those recommendations to the Department of Labor, and hopefully we can, you know, arrive at some regulations that strengthen and support the intent of the law itself.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And we'll also give an opportunity for Lily or Dana to offer any points if they'd like as well. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, we'll jump to another question. This is from Sonia Turner. Have you run into an issue with parents discouraging youth from working because their earnings would raise the family income and reduce ability to get benefits such as Medicaid? And you know, we've heard this anecdotally. So we'll turn this over to everyone on the call as well.
This is Dana. We have seen that happen quite a bit. I remember a participant who had planned out carefully what to do with her first paycheck. She wanted to buy a professional winter coat. She didn't have a winter jacket, and she wanted to buy a pea coat. She had found one on sale, and she bought that pea coat and came home, and her mom basically told her off for trying to be something she's not, and she quit the program a couple days later. So we really used that story as a way to devise programming elements and piece of curriculum in our character class, where we focus on something we call circle of control, talking about how there are things that we can control, things we can't control, and how sometimes family can be part of that, and trying to really work with a participant to align her goals with choices. So we see this a lot, and we work with a lot of participants on how they can balance their choices, their goals, as well as their community.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, we'll jump on to another question here. This is from Luwanda Arai, and she's interested in learning about how agencies who don't currently operate employment programming can support opportunity youth to engage in mainstream employment systems. And so we'll turn this over to Lily, Dana, and Chris.
Hi, this is Chris. You know, I think this is closely related to you know, the other question about you know, the new law and connecting opportunity youth to mainstream services. In many areas of the country, in many localities, you know, the public workforce system is not necessarily geared to really adequately serve chronically unemployed people with barriers to employment, including opportunity youth. And it really is a matter of, you know, in some cases, you know, the public system is your best partner, and in other cases, in other locations, it may not be the case. In other places, there might be community-based organizations that offer workforce development services that would be more appropriate for the people that you're serving, and it might be the case that you'd want to develop a referral partnership with them. Some of the things that we've learned in our work with job seekers experiencing homelessness, one model that we see a lot of promise in is that of an employment navigator, somebody whose job it is to help an individual access and successfully navigate the services that are available to them through the public workforce system. That individual can oftentimes be co-located at a one-stop or job center in order to help people to navigate those services. However, of course, it requires having an organization that will hire, train, and support that individual, and having the funding available to pay for them. But that is one method that we're seeing as showing a good deal of promise in helping people access that system, as well as I mentioned before, our ongoing advocacy and yours to help to put pressure on you know, the system across the country and in every location to be more responsive to the needs of people with barriers to employment.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, we'll jump to another question here from Aaron McGuire. This is specifically for Lily at Roca. Considering that some of the folks involved in your program may have trouble showing up, how much success have you had with encouraging them to engage in substance abuse groups as part of the rehire process? I can imagine with a strong relationship this may be working. Mostly though, I can imagine clients just looking for money maybe elsewhere. How do you support this element of your programming? And then a second question, do you offer the substance abuse groups yourself or do you partner with outside agencies?
So first, most of our groups are offered in-house. We have a few pre-vocational training things that we offer with partners, but for the most part, everything that's in the model Roca offers directly, and that's after a bit of experience with community-based service providers who really aren't used to our young people, and because they're not a group of guys who's very good at following rules, they sort of need a bit of a specialized approach to engagement. I think if it was just transitional employment, we would actually have a problem with engaging guys in substance abuse groups as part of rehire. We don't, and I think a lot of that has to do with the transformational relationships and the fact that youth workers are really working with people around behavior change as these issues come up. And so they're sort of persuaded to, even if it's a drop-in group for the first time, to sort of get them engaged in substance abuse groups. The exception to that, by the way, is we don't do detox in-house, obviously. So if someone really needs detox, we do have partners that we would send folks to for that.
Great, thank you very much. Well, it looks like we are rapidly approaching the end of our time, so we're going to shift away from the Q&A. But I will remind everyone, please continue to send in your questions, even during this presentation. We're logging them, and we'll try and compile them and answer them following the presentation. And we'll also try to make slides and the recording available in the next couple of days in a follow-up email. So I'll pass it back over to Katie.
Great, thanks, Carl. So that really does wrap up our presentation today. So just in terms of next steps, as Carl stated, the webinar and slides will be made available on our website, and we will also email them to you in as timely a fashion as we can. And I just want to end with, again, providing our speaker contacts. I believe I'm not only speaking for our team when I say that we are always interested in hearing from the field and responding to questions and sharing best practices as we did today in our webinar. So please do feel free to reach out to us, and I'll just close off the webinar with some contact information for the National Initiative team. Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, including our panelists. We really appreciate you taking the time.
And I'd also like to note that if you're interested in further reading about the content that you heard today on the webinar, then by all means, please visit our website. The URL is available here on your screen. And look for, under our Resources and Toolkits tab, you can access our Opportunity Youth Employment Toolkit, which includes our paper as well as case study features of some of the programs that we interviewed in the creation of the paper. So we urge you to access that material as well, and to also keep in touch with us through our various social media and blog outlets.
Great, thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.